I'm committed to supporting you and helping you with valuable content in relation to all of your property questions. There's a lot to cover. There always is, but with your support, we at Move IQ can absolutely make it happen. So if you do find the content valuable and useful, I'd be super grateful if you would hit the subscribe button and become part of our community, and we will absolutely carry on doing what we're doing. Well, today I am really pleased to be joined by Martin Roberts. Goodness me, Martin, great to see you. I think the last time we saw one another, we were drinking gin in Cowes, weren't we?
It was Cows Week.
Yes,
and we were doing it that way. I think we both got matching salmon-coloured trousers. I think we both been to the specialist because each of these kind of special things. This was a boating thing, right? And each of them has like an unwritten things that you wear. It's like if you go shooting or play golf, or you have to wear the kind of kit.
Yes.
And I think you and I both been to the same shop in Cowes and bought the same salmon-coloured trousers, so we fitted in.
Well, I think it was the quality of the gins that we were drinking. It was a very fun evening. Anyway, I'm really grateful for you coming on the podcast.
Always a pleasure.
I think you've been on the telly box for longer than me, I reckon.
Not quite.
No?
You're still a little bit ahead. Yeah, I think Location celebrated its 20-year anniversary just a few months or maybe a year or so before Homes Under the Hammer. But if you factor in kids TV and Wish You Were Here and things, then yes, I guess I've been on the telly box for 40-odd years now.
40 years.
I know, God Almighty.
Wow.
It was black and white in those days, Phil.
No, I don't believe you.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Well, Homes Under the Hammer is one of BBC's most popular daytime programmes ever, and it's still going strong.
I know. I just thought, it's a bit like when you start something as epic as Location. You sort of think, this has an inkling that this is going to be really good, but telly's such a fickle world, isn't it? That even the best ideas get taken off the air and for no apparent reason. And we got. Back in 2003, we got a commission of 10 shows, and then that went down quite well. And then they gave us another 20, and then they gave us another 30, and we're now on series 27.
Yeah.
And I think we're 20 years on. We celebrated last November, and I think it's around 1,800 shows. Okay. So I think we kind of pip you on the number.
Oh, you did, without question.
Yeah, because we're daily, so. Yeah. It's a bit more meat factory television, but
is there a typical week in Martin's life? What does a typical week look like? Or isn't there? Well,
no. Are you kidding me? Typical week. So I'm interestingly enough, people say, when's the new series of Homes and Hammer starting? I don't know. I don't know how it works with the shows that you do, but we never stop. There's no new series. So I have actually not stopped filming Homes and the Hammer since March 2003. And they just kind of dribble in new shows into the older shows. And because that's the daytime regular every day kind of way they have to do it. And so it feels like I haven't really stopped. So, I do probably maybe 2 or 3 days filming Homes Under the Hammer. Still not every week, but quite often. And in between that, I've got lots of charity things I'm working on. I'm currently renovating a pub in Wales. I'm sure you might be interested in that. Trying to be a good dad and blah.
There's always a lot going on. Always a lot going on.
There is.
There is. I wanted to talk about books and charity work, but I couldn't get you on and not ask about how was your jungle experience.
Oh, have you been asked to do it? Have you been asked to do it yet?
No, I haven't.
Phil Spencer, why ever not? You or Kirsty would be such good value. So it is much worse than it looks. It was a great thing to do. My kids and I used to watch it, and it was the one thing were allowed to stay up late to watch.
Yeah.
And my kids are now 16 and 14, but this was, 10 years ago. So it was a big deal in October or November when it started for them to stay up late. And there's nothing quite like seeing adults humiliated and made to look silly, and kids absolutely loved it. And so when I got the opportunity of going on, it was like, oh my gosh, it was a massive thing for them. And luckily they got to go out to Australia.
Did they?
So they
Yeah.
got to see the set, and they got to meet on deck and do all that
Mm.
kind of stuff. So, and they got to spend a few weeks in a 5-star hotel while I was in the jungle. But it is it's very clever what they do, really, because they, in order to get the kind of reactions and the kind of stuff that makes great telly, they really do make it very hard. So even before you go in, you've been locked in a bedroom in a hotel for a week without your phone, without any contact with the outside world, without any ability to phone your family, you can't watch telly or anything. You're just allowed to read a book and stuff. So by the time you go into the jungle, you're already fairly in a bit of a state, and then
Yes.
they genuinely do starve you, and you're in with a load of people, and they've obviously picked them quite well to be
Yeah.
potentially confrontational. So it does accelerate human reactions
Yes.
in a very clever way. It is hard. It really is hard. And you sometimes you watch, you go, how honestly people are crying about missing their families and things. They've only been away from them for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And actually when you're in there, it feels like a lot longer.
And when you're really hungry and tired and
Yes,
bored.
yes, and bored. You picked on a really interesting thing there, because of course you see on telly, 40 minutes of a day. There's 23 hours and 20 minutes when you're twiddling your thumbs, doing nothing, and actually, funnily enough, whenever I see people being disappointed that they haven't been picked to do the challenges, I always think that's wrong. They should be really disappointed that they haven't been picked to do the challenges, because it's great to get out of the camp.
Something to do.
Otherwise, it's something to do. Otherwise, you do go a bit stir crazy.
Mm. Well,
so in a nutshell, and it was quite interesting because I went in pretty much as not saying an unknown, but I was maybe a surprise choice. A lot of people didn't necessarily know who I was, and I think a lot of people found me quite irritating at the start, which is quite funny. But as it went on, I was just me, and by the end of it, I think I was quite liked, and I ended up fourth. So I mean,
good experience. You put it down as a good experience.
I would say do it, mate. I would say do it. But you have to be yourself.
Yeah.
Because
there's nowhere to hide.
No, there's nowhere to hide. Now, how are you with creepy crawlies?
Well, I think I'll be all right.
Well, yeah, all right.
I couldn't stand rats. That would be my thing.
I
could not deal with rats.
Then. Really, rats? Oh my gosh, that's bad. What about eating testicles?
Yeah.
No.
I think I'd be all right, but I think the challenges have got harder and harder, haven't they?
Of course. Say. Yeah. I think the old eating live scorpions is. I couldn't have done that.
No.
But anyway, being buried in a coffin with 50 snakes on your head's piece of cake.
Thanks,
but just one word of warning: don't reveal your secret fears to the psychologist who talks to you before you go in, right? Because they are a snitch. Because I told them, they're asking me, they're trying to do the psychological thing. Oh, are you fit? Are you going to loop if you go in the jungle? And so I said, they said, did you have any fears? And I said, well, I do have a bit of claustrophobia, like most people do. Not really, really, really bad. And as I was leaving, she said, well, good luck with that one then. And actually, the first challenge I got to do when I was buried in a coffin, and I had 50 snakes put on my head. So if you do lie, do not mention the rat thing.
I love rats. Yeah, really.
No, you love rats. Bring the rats on. Yeah. Come on. You loved Ben, the song by Michael Jackson as a child. It's one of your favourite songs ever. And rats and you, they're just big fluffy things. Don't mention rats.
Turning to property, auctions.
Oh, we're going to talk about property. Why would we do that?
Yes, well, auctions, they've increased in popularity a lot over the last few years, and it seems the auction world is a busy one. So it'd be great if you could share a few tips and advice for people either selling or buying. And also, I'd love to get your thoughts on the modern method of auctions. So I've been hearing quite a lot and talking to people about that. What's your take?
Not brilliant. Okay, yes. Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that 3% of properties that are sold in the UK are sold at auction. So 97% of properties are sold by other means, which is quite extraordinary. So it's still a relatively unknown and unused way to purchase or sell for the majority of people, which I think is just born out of unfamiliarity and also a certain sense of fear. And I think that's a real shame because there are bargains to be had. Not all auction properties are bargains, but there are bargains to be had if you do your research properly. And the big thing, which is something I'm sure you will adhere to completely, is that when the hammer goes down, you have exchange contracts, right? So you've got 14 or up to 28 days to complete, but there's an assurity. So you unlike being gazumped or things getting in the way, or that's the process that we have for buying and selling properties is just bonkers, isn't it? Where it might happen, somebody can pull out until the very last minute, and you've spent all this time and effort and paid all the solicitor's fees, and then at the last minute somebody decides they're going to pull out because it's a Tuesday and they're eating jelly beans. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And so it's really good. And one of the great things about auctions is that when the hammer goes down, you have actually exchanged. Obviously, that means you have to be ready to complete, which means that when you exchange, you give 10%, and then when you complete, you give the remaining 90%. So you can't swan into the auction without having the money in place. And so I guess that does put some people off. That said, it's a fallacy that you can't get traditional finance on auction properties. You can, but you just need to get an agreement in principle from a mortgage provider based on your personal circumstances, who will say, we will lend potentially on the right kind of property up to £200,000, up to £250,000, up to £100,000, whatever it might be. The biggest thing is to do your research, as with all these things. Visit the property beforehand, check them out. Some dodgy properties do go into the auctions. I like you probably am not phased too much by anything structural. Okay, so the worst subsidence, whatever, you can always deal with it at a cost. What you can't change is legal things. So you must read the legal pack. And the legal pack is that information that's been put together by the seller's solicitors that contains the information that your solicitor, under normal circumstances, would do through their normal course of inquiries. And it'll be things like rights of way, it'll check the title of the property, it'll check its legal status, check whether it's freehold or leasehold, and blah, 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 blah. And without that, you would be insane to buy a property, because you cannot change a defective title in the same way that you can change subsidence. It's a massively expensive and potentially never going to happen job. So the legal side of things is really important to get right. And then just go on. There's some good auction websites which are independent. EIG, it's called EIG Group, and they just list all the auctions that are happening up and down the country and the prices that things have sold for in the past, and they've got data going back like 15 years, and you can see if properties have been multiply entered into auctions. So you can see if number 17 Smith Terrace has actually been in 3 auctions in the last 3 years, and in which case you want to start worrying. So that still stuff's there. And then obviously the world has changed dramatically as a result of lockdown and COVID, when obviously before that the majority of auctions took place live in a room. I mean, in a big hotel room or whatever, and you should go along, and it used to be great theatre and great fun, actually. And you go there, and it's quite nerve-wracking and blah 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 blah. And the likes of some of the wonderful auctioneers like Clive Empson and some of the others would make it a real entertaining show. Obviously, lockdown came. You couldn't have people in a room, so all the auctions switched to online, and much to the annoyance of those auctioneers, they discovered that actually the sales amounts haven't gone down, and the figures are just as much as they were before. So poor old Clive Empson's banging his head against a brick wall, going, all those years I thought I was making a difference and I wasn't. I don't think the world was ready for it in the same way that I don't think the world was ready for, Zoom calls and, video meetings and things. And we were forced into it. But the advantage of online auctions, of course, is that it's a lot easier to attend, because you can just be online.
Yeah.
So you don't have to drive to Birmingham or Southport or Basingstoke or wherever to an auction. You can just do it online, but you still have to put in the legwork beforehand, because you should never buy property before you've seen it. But once you're in that world, just be careful about click fever, and don't do it while you're drunk.
Wise words from Martin. So I've spent a bit of time in Australia, where in my wife's from Melbourne, and houses traditionally in Melbourne are sold at auction outside the front of the street, and it is a piece of theatre, and all the neighbours come out because they want to see who's bidding and what. It's really good fun.
Yeah, similar kind of thing I think they have in America as well, where their auctions is, actually in the property, and it's just, I mean,
it's
I think
transparent, isn't it? People like transparency. You can see who's doing what. There's no.
Yeah, and I think they very much are a barometer of the housing market. If you if you've got a room full of people who don't have to buy, but they're buying because in some cases it's personal, but in a lot of cases it's a business decision, they're factoring in costs. But I think they do say, and I agree, that the auctions are a barometer of the housing market in general. So, you and I have lived through lots of ups and downs and whatever's over time. And you got a feeling probably a few months before we saw the chaos of 2007, 2008, before the recent, drop-offs, that there's something was around the corner. But properties still sell, I mean, it's just the amount that they get is less. So they are a useful indicator. And I think there's always a sense of reassurance that in general there was somebody there who was willing to pay just £500 less than you for that property.
Yes.
So
yes.
I guess it gives you a sense of reassurance that you're on the right track.
Yeah. I've had people come on the podcast before talking about the modern method of auctions, which I'm still kind of getting my head around. But do you have any thoughts on that system?
So if you talk to the auctioneers, they really don't like them, because in effect, it's just like it's an option to purchase. So with a modern auction, and I don't know why it's called a modern auction, it's actually been around for quite a while. In traditional auction, you bid at that moment on a property, and if you're the highest bidder, you win it. And then 28 days later, you complete on the purchase and the property's yours. What people call the modern method of auction is where you bid, if you like, for the option to purchase.
But you actually put money down there and then, don't you?
You do. And often it's a non-refundable deposit.
Yeah.
So you say, okay, well, I'm bidding on the option of buying this house for £100,000. The time constraints are less onerous, so you won't have to necessarily complete within 28 days. You will have to complete within a relatively speedy time, but it's not as pressured.
Yeah. But
you have to pay often quite high fees, and that money is non-refundable. And so I would say, as a general rule, they tend to be more expensive, and probably the auctioneers would say, what's the point? Because it's just like it's a sealed bid.
But the vendor doesn't pay the agent's fees, so it's a benefit to the person selling.
It can be a benefit for the person selling, but one of the whole advantages to a seller of selling at auction is that when the hammer goes down, somebody buys it, you've sold it.
Yes.
So you don't have anyone dropping out the deal. If you're selling the option to purchase, the person has an option to decide no. So you're
but
not
they have
really
put down a non-refundable deposit.
Well, they have, yeah. But it's only a deposit, and if they can't get their money and whatever, and or they change their mind, it's still only a deposit. It's a reasonable chunk of money,
Yeah.
but it's not a commitment to purchase, and you're sort of still in slightly sort of not quite sure territory.
Okay. And just turning to the market as a whole, how do you see things panning out? Well, how are you seeing things at the moment, or likely to predict for the year ahead? But whether you're buying or selling, we've been using a phrase "cautious optimism." The agents seem to be taking on good levels of stock. They seem to be doing deals. There's a bit of activity out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think nobody, including me, saw the rises in the base rate and knock-on effects on mortgage rates coming. And that was a shocker. I mean, I always said there's no way they'll allow rates to go up, because they know everyone's on a bit of a knife edge, and it will absolutely crucify people's finances. And yet it happened, and you could take quite an aggressive stance against the Bank of England for being hell-bent on just sorting out inflation at the risk of the average person struggling to pay their monthly outgoings. It clearly had an effect on slowing down the market, as did the cost of living crisis,
yes,
and energy prices. Yeah. And I think you've also seen a lot of, and that's a bit of a sort of hobby horse of mine, which is private residential landlords, people who own a house which they rent out to provide other people's homes, being absolutely treated like they are the worst members of society in the world, and being not provided with support. Worse than that, actually having existing support taken away in terms of financial help. So, I do some work with the National Residential Landlords Association to try and change the perception, because if these people, these private residential landlords who often buy properties in a derelict state, do them up using their own money and get them back into the housing stock, if they're not there, if they're kicked out of the market, or if they're forced out of the market by not having support, who's gonna provide those houses? Just tell me. It's not gonna be the government.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, the results is that there's going to be less houses on the market, which means that rents are going to go up, which means that there's going to be less people having a roof over their heads. And this image of, nasty money-grabbing landlords is just rubbish. There's a few bad apples in every business, aren't there? The majority of people are working really hard to just, just provide good housing stocks. So
added to which we're not building enough houses,
and persistently failing in that chapter. Yeah. So I think the fact that few people are selling portfolios and all that kind of stuff. When you look at the figures, though, it's not the Armageddon that a lot of people predicted, and the not Armageddon that a lot of people predicted has happened a lot of times, like COVID. When Rishi Sunak was so freaked out about what was going when he was Chancellor that he actually did the whole stamp duty window of not having stamp duty on things, because he had been told it would all go completely fut, and of course it didn't go fut, and in fact it went the completely opposite way, as people moved house to go and get a bit of land and place where they could actually spend this terrible period that we all went through, which was lockdown. So I would like to think that people have been reassured that property is fairly robust. And if you are buying for yourself as a roof over your head, it's a basic commodity. If you can afford it, you should try and do it. If you're buying as a investment opportunity, there is something about bricks and mortar. I mean, you can invest in crypto and it will go down 10% in one day and 10% up the next. You can invest in other things. But property over the medium to long term, it's not very liquid, as in you can't sell it that quickly and get your money out that quickly. But over the medium to long term, property's really done well over time.
Yeah.
And
it's tangible,
risen,
isn't it? You can touch it. And if you need to, you can go and live in it. People like that comfort.
And I think You touched on, you standing on the, in a house in Melbourne and stuff. I think, we do have a very well organized housing market in the UK, either at auctions or just in general, with a very robust thing with the house, land registry, and it's very clear who owns things.
Yeah.
And it's very historical. You got documents dating back, 400 years on the history of a property. And if you're looking at buying anywhere else in the world, sometimes that isn't in place. So I don't think you could say it's necessarily as safe as houses everywhere. But I think in the UK, you have got an assurity and a demand. And,
Yes. Yes.
you've seen the numbers of, anecdotally, you talk to, people who rent out properties, estate agents who are renting, and they're getting 40 or 50 inquiries per property that's coming onto the rental market. And unfortunately, that means that the rental prices are going up.
Yeah.
But
that's a scary world at the moment. But I think the area that we really do have to improve in this country is actually the efficiency of the transaction and how long that takes. There are quite major changes, I think, coming down the track on that score, but we're pretty poor on that one.
Well, that's one of the reasons why,
Auctions
the attractions about an auction, because exactly that. We have this crazy situation where you can enter into almost like a verbal handshake on buying a house and do all the work and spend all that money and waste all that time, and somebody can change their mind for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah.
And you're left carrying the can. You can't sue them if they change their mind because they decided they don't want to sell it for whatever reason. They don't like jelly beans. I don't have to tell you why I'm not going to sell it. I'm just going to sell it. Tough.
Because the longer a transaction takes, the greater the chances of somebody's personal situation in the chain somewhere changing.
Or them getting greedy in a rising market.
Yes. Yeah. Martin, I know you've done lots of charitable work over the years, but tell us a bit about your own foundation, because you set something up, but I know little about it. It's about wellbeing initiatives for children.
So I wrote a series of children's books called The Vills, and this is magical lands aimed at sort of 7-8-year-olds. A magical land where something's gone a bit wrong. So in Tidesville, everyone's always tired, and in Windyville, it's always windy, and in Bawdsville, everyone's always bored, blah, 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 blah. And it gets kids just thinking about problem solving, and there's a central character who goes into these places, and he figures out what the problem is, and blah 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 blah. Anyway, I've always been a lifelong supporter of the NSPCC. My mum used to be a sort of local fundraiser for them, and so I'd always done charity auctions and stuff for them, and I thought, what more can I do? And I wrote a book called Sadsville, which basically took this imaginary land where everyone was sad all the time. There's always a whimsical reason. It's windy in Windyville because the man who built the wind farm is colourblind, and therefore he's wired the fans up wrong so that they're blowing rather than sucking the air. And in Tidesville, there's itchy mattresses. But in Sadsville, everyone's sad because the man who's making the crisps is putting real onions in the cheese and onion crisps. But in the process of reading the story, if you read it out loud to kids, they reveal as to, if it's done right, why the kids in Sadsville, or why the people in Sadsville are all sad. And through that, and through living their life through, a third party, they can often reveal stuff about their own life. And so we produced a copy of this book, and we managed to get a copy into every single primary school in the UK, along with a teacher's, along with a teacher's guide, showing the teachers with lots of resources like PowerPoint slides and blah blah blah, showing them how to use the book to get kids just to recognise, especially their own emotions, and recognise the difference in between what we called good sad, which is where your football team's lost, or your holidays ended, or your pets died, or your friends moved away, and that everyone feels sad. And so I think kids have got to understand, just because you feel sad, that is part of life. And I think there's definitely perhaps a little bit too much emphasis on pushing kids into you've got a real problem, rather than that's just life. Let's work with you to understand that the football team might win next time, or let's analyze that. But getting kids to recognize the difference between what I call good sad and bad sad, which is where you're being bullied, where you're being abused, where you just things are are not right.
Okay.
And at the end of it, a call to action saying that there's the NSPCC child line is there for you if you need support. Reach out to your trusted adults, reach out to your friends, but if you really need support, go to the NSPCC. And so this developed into the Martin Roberts Foundation, which, we set up it's for safeguarding and educational initiatives for children and young people to try and just do what we can to improve their lives. And that's taken a really interesting twist because, and I think you might be quite interested in this, but fast forward to September 2021, and long story, but I ended up coming across an old pub that had closed at the start of lockdown at the top end of the Rhondda Valley in a place called Blind Cwm. And the community had just lost its heart, as often happens when the pub closes. And I'd spent a year in the community renovating another property and fell in love with the place basically. And I saw this pub, and you would, I imagine, be exactly the same. And you could see the potential, right? But you could also see the mess it was in. So I've been renovating this pub, but what we've done is we've worked alongside a local charity that offers 15 to 17-year-old kids who are disengaged with school, often not viewed that well by the schools or the school teachers, because they don't relate to algebra and geography and history, and we give them a chance to come and work in the pub doing construction.
Okay.
So they're getting construction industry qualifications. They're getting something called a CSCS card, which is like recognising the construction industry as you having the practical experience to work on a building site safely and securely. Mm-hmm. And the transformation in these kids is extraordinary. And bear in mind, we're talking about a part of the UK which is hard to believe, but its levels of deprivation are off the scale. Yeah. Even in 2024. And this is the Rhondda Valley. This is like 40 minutes outside the capital of Cardiff. Here's a figure, and this is just a real shocker. The life expectancy, this is 2024, Phil, not 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Life expectancy from Cardiff up the valley, 20 miles to the Rhondda, drops 10 years. So the average life expectancy in the valleys is 10 years less than it is in Cardiff from that area.
Yeah.
And this is 2024. It's not 1824. So there is a lot of deprivation, and the difference it's making to these kids. We get the parents just telling the stories of how the kids come out themselves, and you've got generations who've been unemployed, and we're breaking that cycle. And so it's just another example. And when we're done, we're going to have a teaching kitchen in there. The kids can learn how to cook, and maybe ones who don't want to go to college. Yeah. We're also engaging with the local college. We're going to get the college kids in to run the place and things.
You're a busy man. You can't keep a good man down. Don't you can't. Books, charities, foundations, auctions, renovating pubs. Don't you have a radio show as well at some point?
Yeah, I did have a radio show on Talk Radio for a bit. Yeah, I love radio actually. It was great. I started out my career in radio. And, brilliant stuff.
Well, keep doing everything that you're doing. Really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for your words of advice and wisdom on the auctions.
It's lovely to talk to you, Phil.
And to you, all the best.
You keep up the good work too.